Hey, I'm Brooke Halliday, licensed professional clinical counselor and your host of Coloring Outside the Lines. I believe that we are the byproducts of our experiences and the environments in which we were raised, and most of us have earned a few scars from those things over the years. I've been making it my mission to help people learn to accept themselves and have compassion for everything that they've survived. Through deep and vulnerable conversations with some amazing women, you're going to hear about major moments in their life when they chose to color outside the lines and demonstrate firsthand just how capable we all are. So get ready to be inspired as we color outside the lines and make something beautiful. Okay, hi. Welcome everybody. My name is Brooke Halliday, and this is my first podcast episode. So a little bit about me. Who am I? Why are you choosing to listen to me? I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor in the state of Minnesota, and I've been in the field of mental health for a long time, but working as a therapist for over 8 years in it. Right now, I own a solo private practice in Alexandria, Minnesota that I opened in 2021, July actually of 2021. So we're about 2.5 years in now, named Redbird Counseling, where I currently work by myself, but would love to find practitioners of similar minds to grow the practice and help the community and people as a whole. I am a trauma-informed therapist. I rely heavily on EMDR, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing in my work with clients. I was trained in that during the pandemic 2020. I believe a lot of who we are is based on what has happened to us, how we feel about things, how we respond to things. I think a lot of that comes from, if not all of that, comes from the things we've experienced in our past. Right now, the clients that I primarily serve are likely a lot of the listeners that I'm speaking to. They are tending to fall in the Gen Z millennial category, primarily women, but I'm not opposed to working with men. I think men have struggles and difficulties too. I just at this time I feel, be a little bit more effective with females. But again, I'm open. I primarily see people coming in with symptoms of depression, anxiety, a lot of which stem from trauma and how society tells women to be what they're supposed to want, who they're supposed to be, the things they're supposed to do in their life, all of those things. And ultimately, majority of the women who end up in front of me do so because they're sick of either A, how they're feeling, B, how things are, or C, some combination of the two. So how did I get here as a millennial woman myself, as a professional in the mental health field? I'm going to take you guys all the way back to my childhood. We're going to start at the very beginning. That way you guys know who you're listening to. I think there's a lot of podcasts out there right now. And so if you choose to be a listener of this podcast, I want you to know your host a little bit. I want you to know where I am getting the things that I'm saying from my own experience, from my education, from the clients that I work with. I want you to know that I'm a real person too, and that you can trust me. And I think that starts by you guys being able to know a little bit about me and where I come from. So I grew up in Minnesota, central Minnesota, older sister, younger brother, middle child, definitely a little bit of middle child syndrome here. But my parents divorced when I was pretty young. I remember them splitting before I was in kindergarten. And so I grew up in a split household, which at that time, amongst the people that I was going to school with, was apparently a strange thing. That probably sounds odd now, knowing that the divorce rate is like 50% or whatever. But back in the day, the 90s, which feel like yesterday, but obviously weren't. Back in the day, that was weird and for people. And some of my friends' parents had, I don't know if I want to say issues, but they didn't understand divorced families. And so some of their parents struggled with letting friends come over to my house or have sleepovers, things like that, which doesn't make you feel great as a kid, knowing that somebody's parents are looking at you and thinking like, not going to let my kid go to their house. As a kid, you don't ever think that it's your parents that are doing something. You internalize that as, well, I must be doing something wrong or their parents must not like me. Looking back, I understand now that was not the case. I think those were my first instances of feeling like, hey, I'm a little bit different than the people that I'm around, in a way that I can't do anything about, and feeling kind of helpless with that. I also struggled with some separation. I shouldn't say some. I struggled with separation anxiety from my mom when I was doing the transition back and forth between houses with my parents. Um, Tears, screaming, the whole gamut of things, which I'm sure was really hard and also frustrating for both of my parents. And as a kid, like I don't really recall what I was experiencing at that time, but I can remember the emotions that I was feeling in those moments and how overwhelming they still feel to my adult body. I can only imagine what that was like for me as a kid. Um, for as long as I was going back and forth between my parents' houses, and I made the decision to stay at one house over the other when I was in middle school. And so I had a little bit different path and a journey than my siblings did, which, comes with its own complications of things. My parents, I think, did the best that they could with regards to helping me navigate the divorce, navigating the transition between different houses. And they were big believers in therapy from my recollection. I have had a fair few therapists in my day. And what I'm recalling is multiple therapists that I didn't want to participate with, did not want to talk with. To put it bluntly, I was probably not the best client out there. Yeah, those therapists were probably happy to get me off of their caseload when I eventually stopped going. I think they all probably did the best they could with me as well, given the circumstances. It's hard to work with a client who doesn't want to be in your office. And at that time, I don't think it was my choice to go to therapy. Maybe it was. Again, it feels like a million years ago, but yesterday all at the same time. Um, so yeah, I went to therapy. It was probably not very nice to the therapist. Tried to give them a run for their money. Ultimately, stopping therapy, and just kind of going about life and trying to navigate it on my own, make sense of things the way that I could. For me, that meant a lot of relying on friends and sports and throwing myself into those activities and trying not to think about stuff at home a lot of the times, just because, again, as a kid, there wasn't a lot that I could do about my parents being divorced, having a split house, having strange relationships with siblings and parents. And so I just did what I could to not focus on those things, I think. Um, I'm not sure any of my therapists back in the day would actually remember me now, but if they're listening to this by chance, I would like to apologize because I have now had difficult kids in my office who didn't want to be there. And I just feel for everybody in that situation now. So continuing on, after stopping therapy at I don't even know what age, I remember just kind of feeling like an outsider at school. I had friends. I mean, I played sports. I had a best friend. We hung out on the weekends, all the things. And I just remember feeling like I didn't really fit into a group. I had a friend or a couple friends, but it didn't seem like a group. The groups that growing up you see in movies or read about in books, the friends that you are supposed to be able to rely on, and whatever the jocks, the popular kids, whatever. I felt like I didn't necessarily fit into a group, and especially in middle school and junior high, I remember really, really wanting to be a part of that popular group. I I thought that was going to fix a lot of how I was feeling about myself. I thought it was going to give me a direction or a purpose or happiness. I really think I thought it was going to give me happiness. And I think I was probably struggling a lot more of my life than I even realized, until I was in high school. Obviously, getting a little bit older, you kind of start to pay attention to the things happening around you, getting more involved in relationships, friends, and romantic relationships. you start to feel things a lot more deeply and intensely, I think. I think teenagers sometimes get a bad rap that they are dramatic or overreact to things. And I think it's kind of beautiful. This is like a totally side tangent, but I think it's beautiful because as an adult now, I think we are so desensitized to the things, the emotions, the experiences in life that as a teenager feels so impactful, so powerful, so strong, good and bad, positive and negative, emotions you want, emotions you don't want. And I kind of envy that a little bit, that ability to like feel so deeply. I just don't know that I possess the same type of capacity anymore that I did. That comes with its own set of challenges though, right? In high school, I really, really struggled with depression and anxiety. Remember sitting in 11th grade in my English class, newspaper as literature, in this classroom that was called the fishbowl because one wall was completely made of glass and faced the hallway. And so everybody walking by could like see you sitting in class, which is just like such a strange concept in my mind. Maybe that's normal in high schools. It was the only one in my school. But I remember sitting in this classroom and thinking to myself, if I don't go to therapy now, I will not be alive much longer. And so I pulled out my phone and texted my mom back when texting was like new and you had a limited amount of texts you could send. I used one of those texts to text my mom and something along the lines of, I need to talk to somebody. I need a therapist. I need help. I don't know what I said, but I remember getting in with a therapist within the next, week or two. And I finally clicked with somebody. I finally clicked with a therapist, and she was wonderful. And she was everything that I needed at that time. And she really empowered me to be myself. And she's the first person that I can remember telling me how great I was and just how wonderful I was, and that the world was so lucky to just have me be a part of it. And she made me feel so capable and so grown up and so much more in line with the person that I was based on the experiences that I had had in my life up to that point. When I started seeing her, though, I'll be really honest, I was really self conscious about people knowing that I was in therapy. In high school, everything makes you different. Everybody wants to find that weakness in somebody else so that way they're not the weak ones. And I remember being so nervous that people were going to find out that I was in therapy. And so I don't remember who I told, but I told one person, like, oh, yeah, I think I'm dealing with anxiety, just to kind of test the waters on things. That shit spread so, so fast. And I remember being so embarrassed. I didn't even say anything specific about what I was anxious about or what I was depressed about or that I was in therapy. But the fact that I had anxiety got spread and talked about like nobody's business, which as an adult now, I know is ridiculous and not even a big deal. And again, kids feel things. So I don't take that away from myself or anybody else. All this to say, I have been where a lot of, I think my listeners have been. I know where a lot of my clients have been. I've been in a similar spot. And I mean, that's, in my opinion, how a lot of therapists end up therapists, right? Is that we want to understand ourselves and our family and the people around us, why things happen the way that they do. And so we go to school and we we learn psychology, and then we become the helpers ourselves, and we try and make sense of the world, and we try and make sense of people. And like I said, I've been doing this for over 8 years, and I feel like I know a lot about people, and there's still new things that I'm learning day in and day out. So I struggled in college too with my mental health, and maybe I'll go into that in another episode. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit to bring us up to current day and how I now use where I've been in my life, the things that I've learned to help people, not in a way of like, hey, follow in my footsteps, but in a sense of, hey, I have a lot of empathy for what you're going through. I have a lot of compassion, and I can understand some of the struggle that it takes to make these changes and push back that other people just seem to struggle with sometimes. So towards the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I really started shifting my focus and tried to focus on finding peace, I think is the best way to phrase that. I started trying to find the places that I fit, the people who understood me. Um, I was engaged. I was planning a wedding. I was switching jobs. There was a whole lot going on. I had no shortage of things that I could look at and work on. Um, and I started with a therapist in 2019 and realized that I didn't have my shit quite as figured out as I thought I did. And so we did a lot of work together on boundaries and self advocacy. And what I didn't realize was that I wasn't trusting myself for a lot of things, second guessing my own experiences, second guessing how people thought about me or their perceptions of me, all of it. I was so absolutely consumed with making sure that everybody around me perceived me correctly, that they knew that everything I was doing was in an effort to make things better. And I was just struggling with that. It always, for most of my life, it felt like I was on the outside, that people couldn't quite understand me, that there was something different about me. And I always saw that as a bad thing. I always saw myself as the problem or the one who couldn't fall in line. And no matter how hard I tried, it just never worked. And I think that's because it just never felt right. It never felt authentic for me to fall in line, because the line was not made for somebody like me who feels the way that I do. And so my therapist and I worked a lot with really actually figuring out what boundaries are and how to advocate for myself in a way that just allows my own peace and happiness, and knowing that I can trust the decisions that I make. Those are still things that I work on every day. Here's my belief. Okay, that's where we're going to go. Here's my belief on that. I think when you've been raised one way for so long, whether that's in a strict family or in a church or wherever, I think there's sets of rules that you believe that you're supposed to follow, and a certain way of being that you're supposed to be. And when you don't, or when you can't be that way, it makes you question everything, because you're telling yourself, it has to be me. I have to be the problem. There has to be something that I'm doing wrong or that I haven't figured out that everybody else has yet. And that's not the case. We're not all meant to be the same. We're not all meant to follow the same path and steps and rules. We're just not. And so embracing that, trying to override the years of, it's going to sound strong, but indoctrination that we have been exposed to, I think it's something that we just have to consciously combat for as long as it takes. And at this point in my life, it just hasn't become second nature yet. And so reminding myself that I can trust myself, that advocating for myself doesn't make me a bad person, that you only set boundaries when you want to protect things. Those are constant things that I'm having to tell myself, and I tell my clients too. And so I'm doing this work right along with the clients that I work with, the people that I'm seeing, and it's hard as shit. Ooh, therapy is not for the faint of heart. It is not for the people who want an easy experience. That shit fucking sucks sometimes. So, I mean, that's just a little bit about how I got to be the therapist and professional that I am. And so, you know, all the professional stuff now. So, let me give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of me, of who I am. I don't need to be the great and powerful Oz. I'm just Brooke. So, I'm married to my husband, who I met in 2015. We met online for anybody wondering. He was the first person that I went out with on Match.com, and he was the only one I went out with. And when I signed up, The goal was just to get out of my house every now and again while I was in grad school and maybe get a free meal here and there. Um, but he was the first one and he stuck. And we went Dutch on our first date too. So I didn't even get a free meal out of it. Um, but we got married 6 months before the pandemic hit, and our life kind of got flipped, turned upside down, if you will. A lot of our plans got put on hold. My job shifted to being completely virtual. He was in chiropractic school. A lot of the things that we had planned for the early parts of our marriage just didn't happen. And so we fast forwarded a little bit and we got pregnant with our first child, our daughter, Evelyn, who we ended up losing when I was 30 weeks pregnant. In my pregnancy with Evelyn, there were some complications. She had a chromosomal abnormality on her fifth chromosome and some other health factors. It's been almost 3 years now and still miss her every day and have to parent a child who's not living anymore. And that's a struggle. And we love her and we miss her and we wonder about her every day. We also have a son who will be 2 in March named Bridger. He is a wild child. And if the stories that I hear about what I was like as a child are true, he is 100% me as a kid. And I'm loving it. It's exhausting and rewarding and frustrating all at the same time. And having Evelyn before Bridger, she gave me such a beautiful gift of being able to be so much more present and just enjoy the journey with him. And as a perfectionist, she's just helped me know that, like, for him, everything doesn't need to be perfect. And then last but not least is my dog Bella, who I got when I was in high school, when I was really struggling. She was my little Christmas puppy that I got, and I love her dearly. She is over 14 years old now and is just starting to have some health complications. I'll just say this. There's no reason dogs shouldn't outlive humans. They're so much better than us, and she's been with me through all the big things, the big adulting things in life, and she's my little sidekick. So, as a family, we live in what I consider to be a small town in Minnesota, and I'm trying to practice what I preach. Through that, I'm trying to model emotional regulation for my son and have good communication with my husband. I try to say no to things that don't fall in line with the life that I want to live. I grow my business in a way that if somebody talks about it, I want to feel really proud. And I want everybody to know that they're welcome and accepted by me in my business. Some of the things that I currently still struggle with are allowing my emotions. And that might sound weird as a therapist, but I'm a big intellectualizer and I like for things to make sense. I'm very type A. I want things to line up all nice and pretty, and I want it to just make sense. And emotions are messy and unpredictable sometimes, and they can be really overwhelming. And even as a therapist, I struggle sometimes with emotions and allowing them to just be what they are. And so I still work on that every day. Also, acceptance. After losing our daughter, I didn't realize how many things you just have to accept in life, that no matter how much you resist it, no matter how much you fight it, no matter how much you don't like it, no matter how much you try and logic your way out of it, there's just some things in life you have to just accept. And acceptance doesn't mean tolerate. And so let's just be really clear about that. I am learning acceptance and then making the decisions that are right for me from there. So why am I starting a podcast? In the sea of other podcasts, why another one? Why another one by a therapist? Why listen to this one? We have a limited amount of time in our day. Why are you going to listen to this one? To be totally honest, I don't know. Getting on this microphone and sitting in front of this camera that I am right now, I'm pretty scared shitless. It feels really vulnerable for me. And again, I like to practice what I preach. So here I am doing the damn thing because being scared is not a valid reason to not do something. So this podcast, I want to bring on some normal guests. I don't even want to say like really great guests because I think all people are great. I want to bring on some really normal guests, some guests that everybody can relate to or who have shared similar struggles so that way they can share how they made choices or felt like outsiders or survived the thing that felt impossible to survive and how they did that. Because I think the only way to do that is to not follow the steps laid out by other people in front of us. I think it's carving your own path and making your own choices, making your own life. And so I want to bring on guests who've done just that, who have colored outside the lines, if you will, made their own picture of what life is. I want this podcast to be inspirational for people and motivational, knowing that if somebody else did it, why can't you? People forget just how capable they are of things. And I like to ask my clients a lot of times, what couldn't you come back from? We've all survived so many things already. What couldn't you come back from? It's just a powerful question when you really think about it. So in addition to being inspired and motivated, I also want there to be some education here. I think in mental health, in society as a whole, there's a lot of unspoken things, a lot of things that we're just expected to know about, but they're things we wouldn't know unless somebody told us or taught us about them. And so I want there to be a little bit of education sprinkled into all of this. But most importantly, I want there to be this sense of community that listeners can relate and rely on one another, that guests and me as the host are all part of this network together, that we know we're not alone. We might be the weirdos, we might be the black sheeps or the outcast, but we're not alone. And that those things, coloring outside the lines, being the black sheep, being the one who's different or doesn't fit into a group, that's our magic. That's our power. And so here I am showing up, telling you a little bit about me. I try and be an open book with people. And so if there's things that you want to know, if there's things that you want to see on this podcast, let me know. I'm open. I'm open to talking about things. If there's things that I want to protect for privacy's sake, I will be open about that. But yeah, I want this podcast to be more than just the small talk. I want it to be deep, meaningful connections with people. So if you made it all the way through this episode, I just want to thank you for letting me be vulnerable, for letting me have this opportunity to be brave. I just want you to know you can do the same thing too. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I know that the topics that we talk about on this podcast can be heavy and bring up a lot of emotions for people, and that's no reason to shy away from these conversations. If you're a fan of trying to get these conversations out to as many people as possible, I could use your help. Rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the podcast helps it reach more people. I always love to hear your feedback on the episodes that we put out and the topics that you want to hear more about. So head to www.redbirdcounseling.mn.com. From there, you can send me an email and join our online email community to get more updates about the podcast and everything happening mental health and Redbird Counseling. Be sure to also follow us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Redbird Counseling MN and Facebook Redbird Counseling MN21. Until next time, remember, you're not alone, your story matters, be kind to yourself, and don't be afraid to color outside the lines.